Okay, well, welcome everybody to today's Learner Speaker Series. Today we have Maria Moss, who is a repeat guest at GitLab, here to speak with us on a topic that is compassionate feedback. Maria's here as our third speaker from this quarter's speaker series, and this series is called Collaborating with Compassion. So we've had a few other speakers, one per month, and we're rounding out the quarter today with Maria talking about compassionate feedback. You might recognize Maria because, like I said, she's come and spoke to the GitLab team before. Last time she was part of our all remote communication speaker series. And if you've taken Crucial Conversations, you'll also recognize her as a trainer from the Crucial Conversations course. I'm really excited to have Maria here today. She has really great experience and is an excellent speaker, so really excited to learn from her. If you haven't been to one of these speaker series before, the structure that we follow is for the first 20 minutes or so, Maria and I will go back and forth with a fireside chat, and I'm going to ask Maria the 3 questions that you can find in the meeting agenda, which I will add in the chat now in case you don't have it open. And then after those 3 questions, we'll move to team member questions with like an AMA format. So as Maria and I are talking, if you have any follow-up questions for her, or you think of new questions or topics you want to ask her about giving and receiving feedback, please feel free to add them to the team member questions section of the agenda. And then during the last 20 minutes of the call, we will get through as many as we can. I'm recording this call, so I will share it with anyone who isn't able to watch it here live with us. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Maria to give us a brief introduction of herself. Thanks, Maria.
Awesome. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Glad to be here again, speaking with you all at GitLab. Thank you, Samantha, for having me. But a little bit about me. I am a leadership, employee development, training specialist, speaker, coach, all those wonderful things. Kind of a career I fell in by, just, oh, I really like this. This is cool. Let me figure out how to do this. More than about 12 years ago. So I have worked both in internal corporate organization. Last 6 or so years, I've been working as an independent consultant, facilitator, trainer, and coach, just really helping and wanting to help people find their successes, get better at what they love, learn the skills that help them grow and help them grow the people they work with every day. I come to you all from the Savannah, Georgia area, so I'm in the southeastern hottest part of the world probably right now, United States, but that's where I'm coming to you all from, and glad to be here. And as Samantha mentioned, I'm part of the master trainer team with Crucial Learning, so definitely spend a lot of time talking about conversations, talking to each other in a way that helps us to shift the dial on those 2 things that really matter, our results and our relationships. So I'm glad to be here talking with you all today.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Maria. Excited to have you here. So I'll move us into this first question and we'll get going with these 3 fireside chat questions. So this first question is, what does it look like to give compassionate feedback? And can you give some examples of how both a manager or individual contributor might give feedback that has a focus on compassion?
I love it. Such a good question, and such a necessary question, I think, Samantha, because, as we all know right now, the last several years of our life and our world have definitely shifted for every single person on the planet, which I think is a good thing because it's kind of aligned us to understanding how common and how much we all have in common, but definitely created some opportunities where when we're giving feedback, when we have to have those conversations, it's definitely necessary to think about that compassion side. So I think when I look at what does it look like, or what does it mean to give compassionate feedback? It is giving feedback to a person from a lens of concern and caring, not only for changing the results or changing the things that we want changed, but also from a lens of really wanting the best for that person. And I think that's where it kind of looks a little bit different to say compassionate feedback, because it's, yes, we have outcomes or behaviors we want to see be different or things we want changed. And at the same time, I want it to be something that is good for you and helps to support you and helps you to grow. So I think that's what it really kind of, to me, means to give compassionate feedback. And what it looks like is, taking the time to think about another person's circumstances as you're giving feedback. And even if it's things that you don't like, broken promises, violent expectations, some behaviors you don't care for, at least slowing down enough to kind of think about, that person's lens, their shoes, what they may be going through as we're giving that feedback. I also think it includes, giving that compassionate feedback will involve letting the person know the impact maybe those things are having on you, being really able to describe to them the behaviors or the things that we want to see different. And I also say, and then doing it in a way that we're encouraging them to talk back to us, because we don't want it to just be a drive-by, dump of feedback, but definitely doing it in a way that not only am I giving you my perspective and the impact this is having on me, I'm opening the door to learn more about what may be going on with you or what may be causing these things to occur. And so I think that's kind of what it looks like in general. And tips, really thinking of examples for both managers and ICs to give that feedback. There's a template that I like to use, or I've seen a couple times, that's like an instant feedback template, which really helps with real-time feedback in the moment. Again, still kind of balancing that other person and those outcomes at the same time. And so it goes kind of to saying, starting off with a little bit of description. So when you came in late to our staff meeting today, I felt as if things were going to be missed and information was going to be dropped because everyone wasn't present. What I'd like to see is that we all arrive on time, because it's really important to all of us to respect each other's time, because it also helps us to be most effective as we communicate, work together, and ensure that we're making the best decisions as a group. And then what do you think? So using that kind of template to help people not only kind of see the impact this is having on you, see your lens, but also the impact it's having on results, the desired outcomes, and then giving them a chance to respond. And so again, in quick, it's like a when you, I feel, because, what I'd like, because, and then what do you think as our starters for that feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that focus. And I always try to connect like what our speakers are saying to GitLab values, and like we rank our values and results is our top value. But also one of our values is friends and family first. And it almost feels like giving compassionate feedback is prioritizing the results that you're trying to achieve, but also like recognizing that it's like two human beings who are giving and receiving feedback to each other, and not compromising one for the other, but like finding a happy medium. And it seems like this template really combines those two in the same moment.
Definitely. I always say, to me, I kind of see Samantha like a scale of results and relationships. And that's the thing that we are balancing, not letting one be, at the expense of the other. Because if we focus too much on the results, that feedback, anything we give people is probably going to be delivered in a way that takes the person out of the equation. Like you said, it's not just two people, we're just talking about this, so the results focus only will take the person or the humans both out of the equation. And then on the opposite end, sometimes if we focus too much on the relationship piece, the results suffer because we are not willing to step up and have these conversations, or we sweep things under the rug, or we talk in circles and we're trying to give feedback and people don't understand what they're doing wrong or don't know what to do differently. So it's really that delicate balance. I always think of it as scales between those two important things: the results that we care about and things that we do every single day, and also those relationships that help us to get those results. And how can we give feedback in a way that we're supporting, nurturing, and including both?
Yeah,
So
I love that. Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this next question is kind of like, so what happens when we don't do this? So how can we act if we either give or are given feedback that lacks compassion? And maybe what are some strategies we can use to reopen and revisit these feedback conversations if and when trust is lost?
I like it. Good question. I like that. I like that one. Because I think, on the being given feedback, I'll kind of start there. We, on the receiving end of feedback, definitely have no control over the messenger as they're delivering that feedback. So one of the things I think that really helps me when I'm being given feedback, and maybe I feel it's lacking that compassion or lacking, that human element, is I always try to remember I am in charge of how this feedback makes me feel. I am in charge of how this feedback affects me. And I am in charge of taking from this feedback the value that I can find, even if the messenger isn't delivering it perfectly. So I think for me, that's kind of the first thing, recognizing that, I can own what I choose to own out of this feedback. And everyone's not going to be perfectly equipped to give me feedback in a way that it just feels good. So I definitely have to recognize, this person may be coming from a place of frustration, a place of angst, or some pain points on their end. They're giving me feedback. It may not be perfect, yet I'm going to look for what's valuable in this feedback to be able to move forward and do things differently. And then I also think, and post that conversation, maybe letting some time go by, not too much, but enough time possibly for emotions to kind of calm, maybe in the other person, maybe even in me, because of how I've received the feedback, allowing a little bit of time, and definitely going back and using it as an opportunity to give the feedback giver, some feedback on how their message was shared. And it might be something like, Dave, you came today this morning to give me some information about some errors I made. Well, I appreciate you pointing out the errors because it allowed me to correct them and us to resolve this as a team. I want to talk about how that conversation went because there were some pieces of it that just didn't resonate very well with me from a receiving end. I'm not sure if you even are aware of this, and so kind of going and having that conversation with the person about the feedback, but definitely knowing that I can own whatever I take from feedback, and everyone's not going to be a perfect messenger. So I definitely say that's on one end. And then for me too, if I am the giver and I, at some point, usually what is the saying, hindsight is 2020, recognize that my messaging was not the best, for that feedback. I have and do, go back and say, hey, James, I need to check in with you. Early this morning, we had a conversation. I was coming from a place of frustration. And in hindsight, I don't think I handled that well. And I definitely want to come back to you and check in and see how you're feeling, and see if there's anything you want to bring to my attention about how I could have done that differently going forward. And I have had those conversations because to me, it's like sometimes in that moment, those emotions, we are so hyped up on the emotion or frustrated or so focused on the problem, like solving the problem, that we sometimes don't think about the delivery method. So it's important to have the ability to self-reflect and in those moments be willing to re-engage. And James may say, no, it was completely fine. I goofed, like I'm good. And you're like, okay, or maybe James at that moment gets the opportunity to say, yeah, Maria, I didn't like how you came over and said that, and I was in the middle of something. You didn't give me a chance to pause. And then me getting that feedback from James, being willing to take it and use it going forward to really help try to restore the trust with James, restore that relationship, and not make those same mistakes again. Because the best apology is change behavior. So if I go and ask and you tell me you don't like how I did something or the way I sent something, being willing to do it differently in the future. And I have an example. I am a, if you've ever taken Myers-Briggs, I'm an ESTJ. If you've ever taken DISC, I'm a D. So I have a lot of those directive problem solving. I am a get her done, January Capricorn type person. And I never forget a colleague who told me during conversation, she's like, it feels like you're interrogating me. And I was like, what? And she's like, it feels like you're interrogating. No, I'm just telling you, like, we need to fix this thing. And she's like, no, it feels like an interrogation. And I was kind of hurt because I was thinking I was doing like good and thinking it was okay. And I remember kind of walking away from the conversation, calling a timeout, and later coming back to that person and saying, okay, so what can I do differently? Like, I was not trying to interrogate you, yet I cannot say that's not how it felt to you because that's your experience with what I was doing. So what can I do differently? And she said, well, you just ask a lot of questions all at once. And I was like, okay, I studied criminal justice. I used to be a probation officer. I can get it. And she said, could you send me the questions in an email that you think you want to ask to at least let me have some time to think through them before we meet? That way, when we meet, I'll have some solutions already in mind. And if additional questions come up, we can go from there. But it's just the rate of questions that you fire out, so quickly that made it feel like that. And I was like, done, like easy fix. And so I definitely say, like, when you ask or you go back and you try to find out maybe what you did wrong, incorporating it and doing things differently going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that story too, because at GitLab, we use meeting agendas to drive like all of our meetings. And something that seems to always come up in a lot of these live speaker series is like conversations between managers and their direct reports, and also like people, like just between people in general. And having an agenda that you've added questions to or topics to ahead of time is something I think across the board makes people feel more comfortable and prepared and like ready to go into that conversation. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And also I just really like the focus on like we're responsible for our responses, and like we get to like control that aspect of it. So thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome. If I could teach how to fix other people, I would. And I can't, the only person we can control is us. And it's really, and that was kind of eye-opening too, having a conversation with Joseph Grenny, one of the authors actually of Crucial Conversations. And he talked about being what he called feed smacked. And he's like, we talk about how we can deliver messages all the time. We don't always talk about how to respond when it feels like we've been smacked in the face with some feedback, maybe some stuff that didn't feel as good to us. And so some of those were the thoughts that, Joseph and I discussed and shared, was like, you can't control that. Only thing you can do is control your response and your takeaways from even imperfect messages.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad the conversation is going here because coming up, I think that signups maybe end today. I would have to check the handbook, but next month our 360 like yearly review cycle happens. And I wanted to talk, so I'm glad we're talking about like that, receiving feedback if you receive it and maybe it isn't what you expected. But I wanted to ask you, like, so 360 feedback reviews are really helpful. And I think it's even better when we're always giving and receiving feedback. So I'm wondering if you can talk about some practices that we can integrate into our work that helps us to feel empowered to both give feedback regularly and also feel like ready to receive it regularly.
I like it. I like it. I think, Samantha, one of the things to kind of keep in mind about feedback, like you do want that to be something that's a little bit more day to day, because we have our structured performance evaluations, 360 conversations, like all those things that we know are going to happen. But what you don't want to happen is, it's been 6 months of a problem or 6 months of a challenge, and a person is only hearing about it at this evaluation. So it's just starting to really recognize the necessity of day-to-day feedback and making all of us successful. I think it's Kim Blanchard who says like breakfast, she says feedback is the breakfast, lunch, and like afternoon snack of champions, something to that effect. But it's really about, again, recognizing the only way we are going to get better is receiving feedback and knowing that there are two different types of feedback. I think the one that we kind of shy away from or have challenge with, or definitely have to remember compassion, is corrective feedback. So when there are aspects of someone's performance or work that just isn't what it should be, needs to improve, like that's the one that we think about the most. And that's the one a lot of times we find the most challenging. And also remember, reinforcing feedback is just important, and it's that when someone is caught doing something good, how can we, in those moments, give that feedback to reinforce that behavior and make it most likely that it will occur, going forward. And so in order to just kind of help get comfortable with day-to-day feedback, knowing those two different kinds of feedback and recognizing that you need to give both. And I think most of us would be willing to give that reinforcing feedback, because that one is the one that's like, okay, I get to go tell, Alina that she did a great job. I get to go tell Alina she did something amazing. And sometimes we don't, because we just think, people are doing what they should be doing. They're doing their job. So starting to recognize that reinforcing feedback is important. Let's make sure we're giving that pretty frequently, which I think will also start to build some of that muscle when we have to give corrective feedback, because people are getting in the habit of hearing feedback, knowing that feedback will be given, and definitely knowing that it's not always going to be, bad, right? So reinforcing feedback as you're telling someone they did a great job, again, kind of using that same template. What exactly specifically did they do? When you came in this morning and presented in that staff meeting that you weren't supposed to present in, I felt really, excited and surprised to see you stepping up, taking initiative, because it's really showing, all of your leadership skills and things you're bringing to the table. I'd love for you to continue doing that. And then actually saying, and thank you, so actually expressing that thanks on the tail end of that reinforcing feedback. And for corrective feedback, I think, again, the more we recognize that it is something that is necessary and important, and not every time we get feedback is going to be bad, it will make us more comfortable in those moments when we do need to give that correcting feedback. And I'll send that template to you, Samantha, and you can share it with everyone too, of just those different phrases to start it off, but just starting to think about, something that's nice, short, sweet, that we can keep in our mind or in our back pocket that helps us to be able to step up and give that feedback. And then I also think back to the compassion part. The most important piece that we can kind of keep in mind is like our feedback is only as important as how it helps this person to do whatever they need to do differently or continue doing whatever they need to do. So it's just remembering the impact of that feedback is only as valuable as it is to the listener. So as we are giving this message or wanting to give these messages, it's because we are wanting to help. Help this person continue to do these things, help this person change these things that should change. And we want to do it in such a way that it is palatable to the listener's ear. So I think that's important. And even just if you kind of go through your week and say, hey, I work with 10 people, at least once this week, I want to give everybody some feedback. Some of it may be reinforcing, some of it may be correcting, but I want to at least once a week check in with my peers or give my boss or my direct reports just some feedback on how things have been going. I think the more that we kind of condition ourselves to it being normal, natural, and necessary, the more comfortable we'll get giving that feedback, even outside of those structured conversations and feedback opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And I think that like building that habit and then making sure that the intent is always, recognizing, like you said, feedback is only as important like as the impact that it's going to have on the person that you're sharing it with. So building that habit with that focus, I think, is really healthy. Yeah.
Yes, because if you give feedback all day long and it's delivered in such a way that people aren't able to hear it, because they get so blocked or distracted by how you said something or, the timing of it, maybe it's something 8 months ago and you're just telling me I was doing it wrong,
Mhm.
they're not able to do anything with it. So at that point, we're wasting everybody's time.
Yeah.
So appropriate timing, appropriate language, keep those things in mind, making sure that you are describing the behavior in behaviorally specific terms, whether it's good or bad, because just saying to someone, good job, hey, Julie, good job. Julie's like, okay, but good job on what? So really being able to describe the behavior, impact of the behavior, appropriate language, appropriate timing are just kind of quick things to keep in mind for either type of feedback to make sure we're doing it more consistently.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to transition us now off of this fireside chat and onto team member questions. If anyone on the call has any questions, please feel free to add them to the team member question section. I actually just added one in there because I haven't seen any yet, and I thought of one that I have for myself. So as I ask this question, if anyone on this call has any questions for Maria, either a follow-up or like a net new question about feedback that you want to hear, please feel free to add it to the agenda. And yeah, Maria, if you're okay, I'm going to ask you another question while we wait for others to come in. So I'm wondering if you can talk about like how to ask someone for feedback, and maybe like ways that you can ask someone to give you feedback that is like shaped to meet the goals you're trying to achieve. Like if, say, I'm like trying to work on my communication style at work, how can I like, what are some ways I can ask people that I work with for feedback so that I get what I need to work on that goal that I've already set?
Nice. I like that question, Samantha. Because I think one thing is that we hope we would get feedback about things, yet we don't always ask. And so if people don't know, especially around specific things that we would love, feedback, how are they going to know? So I think, one, just being really intentional about who you're asking, first of all, like who you're asking, because you want to ask someone who has some knowledge, awareness, and experience with whatever the specific topic is. So if I say I want to get some feedback on, I don't know, my reports, right? I want to make sure I'm asking a person who has access to my reports. If I want to get some feedback on interpersonal skills with other people, I want to ask someone who's around as I'm interacting and probably, in those more challenging type project, sensitive, stressful times, to give me some feedback. So I definitely say make sure the person has access to what you're asking for feedback on, whether it be you, whether it be certain situations that you're in, etc. And be really specific, and go to them, because when you're asking for feedback, you probably have already identified there's something that you're doing that probably isn't what you would like it to be. So be really specific about, I want you to come and watch as I am problem solving with Beverly on this really tough situation. And I want you to look for what are about 3 things that I don't do so well as I'm having this conversation with Beverly. So give them, what you're looking for specifically. I think even included in asking for that feedback is letting the person know, maybe why you're asking them, because maybe you've seen that they've done something really well. Or maybe that they have expertise or a skill set that you are wanting to develop. So make sure you kind of let them know too, hey, I came to you, Diana, and asked for this, asked you to give me feedback because I've seen that you have excelled time and time again as it's related to dealing with difficult customers. And I want to get better at that. So, next week I have to have this meeting with the client who's already upset. is there any way you could sit in and give me some tips and pointers on about 3 things that I'm not doing so well? And I tend to say the number 3 is a really good number. If you ever recognize, like, our social security numbers are broken down in 3s, our phone numbers are broken down in 3s. A lot of things that we get as data are in 3s because our brains tend to handle 3s really well. So that's why, 3 is enough that they're able to kind of watch the interaction, capture some things for feedback, but not be so, busy trying to capture notes that they miss, anything that may be of importance. So definitely going in with that, hey, I want to talk to you about this feedback I'd love to get from you. Here's why I want to get it from you. Can you watch and give me about 3 things that I could do maybe differently going forward, or 3 things that I'm doing really well, or either or, and having that be the conversation.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Maria. Great tips. I'm going to use them myself. So I don't see any other questions in the agenda.
Samantha,
Oh, yeah.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I'm walking and I
No.
don't see the document. So is it okay if I just ask it?
Go for it, Alejandro.
Thank you. So thank you, Maria, for the insights. And the question is more, I think internally, this is great content. And I'm wondering if this is part of the, as we have new managers, I wonder if this is part of a new manager's classes, or is it something that it's part of the content that new managers have to go through? Because I think it would be great for managers or leadership to understand this part. It certainly would help our jobs, right? If my managers, and even obviously us, understand how to ask and provide feedback. Thank you.
I definitely know, Alejandro, that I work in an area where I teach a new manager program, and this is one of the core components. So I definitely concur that it is so important as a new leader, existing leader too, and definitely a new leader, to have some framework and some skill set around giving feedback, giving and receiving feedback. So I definitely know it's important. And a lot of our new managers that have gone through the program have found that to be probably the most valuable thing, because they've gone from, doing the work themselves, right, to getting work done through other people. And it's like, oh, that's a whole nother skill set, because I was a really good individual contributor and now I can't touch it myself. And I have to be able to give these people feedback, information to help them to be able to ensure our successes, because managers are evaluated off of the success of the teams that they lead. And so it's definitely an essential skill for new managers. So I'll jump to Samantha to see if there's any component that you have, or we can help.
Yeah, for sure. I believe that there is some, I know we have some giving and receiving feedback training in our learning platform that is linked to the new manager training. And I'm also really excited, just like from L&D world, recently we had a new L&D director join. I haven't seen her on the call. I think it's still kind of early for her, so I don't think she's here. But one of the things that, her name is Satu Salmanen, and one of the things she's really focused on is kind of like redefining what the new manager and existing manager training looks like at GitLab. So I really like this call out, Alejandro, about how important the feedback piece is. And I'm going to make sure to tag Satu in these notes as she's kind of building out that next iteration of manager training at GitLab.
And I'll definitely jump in too. And another thought, kind of around our same feedback line too, Alejandro, is in addition to these instant feedback opportunities and day-to-day feedback, even starting to create the opportunities for one-on-one. So I don't know if you all currently do the one-on-one check-ins, but having this not as formal as like the 360 evaluations, yet, kind of regular cadence of communication as well, both as managers and even as individual contributors, because it's a two-way street in those one-on-ones, to be able to check in, once a week, twice a month, whatever, and just have an opportunity to just sit down and give feedback and have conversation on whatever, to help both grow. Managers to check in and say, how am I doing as a manager, which is really important for new managers, and direct reports to know, oh, this is regular, like this is just what we're doing. Okay, good. And start to say, I can come to these meetings and give that leader feedback, but also at the same time know that I can ask for, back to Samantha's question earlier, ask for what I need help with and ask for what I need feedback on in those one-on-one check-ins as well.
Yeah, I think we do have those, Maria, but I'm not sure if that feedback mechanism is installed in those sessions, as formal as you describe it. And I think we need it because as as someone that works in front of customers, I mean, I can tell you that I know the risks if I don't do my job. That's very clear to me, right? So that type of feedback is very clear to me. But it's the other side, right? And this goes beyond getting paid and getting bonuses or stock options, right? What's on the other side, in terms of positive feedback? I think that not, and this goes beyond just, I know we have a thank you channel, which is great, but I think it goes beyond that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Thanks, Alejandro. Khan, it looks like you're next. Do you want to voice your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Manga. So the question is, what would be a proper way to give feedback to a not so friendly coworker? What I'm trying to say is, if a feedback is critical, you think that it would improve his or her performance, or there's something lacking about that person, and the intent is to positively convey your message so that the person improves himself. So what would be a good way to do that if it's if he's not a not not so friendly coworker?
I like that. Good question. In real life too, right? We have to give feedback sometime to people who there may be some opportunity in our relationship, or some people who honestly may not receive feedback well. And I think for me, one of the things in those situations in particular is honestly, first I have to work on, like, in my own head, am I already telling myself that they're not going to receive it well, which is probably going to impact how I deliver it, and definitely a lot of times become that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If I've already said, oh, they're not going to receive it, they're not friendly, they don't want to hear anything, it's going to definitely impact how I show up and have the conversation. So I kind of work on me and say, if it was me, why might I have a challenge with this feedback? Or if it was me, why might I be in this kind of relationship that this coworker and I are having? And just really kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. There's a quote I heard from Plato, probably one of my favorite quotes. It's, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle." And I think I kind of focus on that before I even open my mouth, to help me go into the conversation, assuming, working towards, and almost like, commanding the best possible outcome. And the other, like, more practical tip too is, I am really, in those conversations, really, really clear on the data I'm presenting to this person about what needs to be changed or what needs to be different. So I try to go in, again, having really looked at whatever the issue is, and come up with a couple of examples of where this person may be doing something wrong, or the information may be wrong, or whatever. I'd use more I statements than you statements. So rather than saying, you messed up on this report 3 times in the last week, I'd probably say to the person, I noticed there were some errors on this report 3 times in the last week. And even just using the I messages versus the you messages makes things more of your observation versus an assignment of intent or blame or guilt that you messages can sometimes communicate. And then I think in those conversations as well, I'm really open to getting to trying to gather their perspective as soon as I can. I noticed that 3 times this week on this report, there were errors. I'm not sure of what may have contributed to these errors. I know it's something that was assigned to you in particular. Can you help me understand your thoughts on what may have happened in this situation? And try to get really to getting them into the conversation. But again, upfront, working on myself, working on that story I'm telling myself about this person, maybe why this happened, our past interactions, data points, iMessages, and then getting really quickly to the open-ended questions to get them talking, to understand a little bit of their perspective as we hopefully at this point start to move together towards solutioning. And then here's the last thought. And if this is a person that I know, definitely we don't have a good working relationship, and I'm probably not the best messenger, because no matter what or how I say it, they are not going to, in my thought, like, hear it because of maybe trust issues, which I think we hit on earlier, or things that have happened in the past. Yet I know this feedback is valuable for them to improve. I would probably solicit the assistance of someone that I know they have a better relationship with, and have them almost be the messenger of this feedback, just because, again, I want to make sure that the information is shared and the person is able to hear it. And if I'm the hindrance, I'm fine taking me out of the equation as long as the results happen, the relationship hopefully improves from here on out, and this person can continue to be successful. So sometimes it's calling in a third friend to help us out. Hope that helps sometimes.
Very useful tips. Thank you so much.
Rob, it looks like you're up next.
Yep. Hey, Maria. Thanks for holding this. This is really helpful. I've often found that sometimes feedback can be given at a time that isn't necessarily appropriate, or either in a group setting, or if somebody is outwardly frustrated or stressed. Sometimes the last thing they need is a critique. Do you have suggestions as to when to recognize, maybe kind of a follow-on to the previous question, but when to recognize when somebody might be open to receiving that feedback, when they would be open to that discussion, and ways to potentially broach the conversation in a friendly way, so that it's less of it becomes less of an argument and more of just a conversation among friends. So being able to prevent the defensive feedback before the defensive response to the feedback before it starts. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that is an excellent question, Rob. Kind of looking at it two parts. So one, the emotional state of the other person, right? And I feel like you kind of answered it as you were asking it. So definitely the awareness. If I am coming to have this crucial conversation with Simon, give him this feedback, and I can already see Simon's not in a good place, the nonverbals, right? I'm seeing them all across the board. Or as I start to try to approach the conversation, noticing, like you said, Rob, like, it turns into an argument or that kind of defensive response. I always remember, again, my favorite quote, my Plato quote, but definitely when people feel like they're being confronted, those instinctive responses, a lot of time we will deny, defend, or deflect. And when you are having someone doing that, they're not going to hear what you're saying at any turn, because you are going to just keep hitting up against, this wall of defensiveness. So I definitely say, and you said it kind of, when I notice that, I will definitely give a person an out. And how I tend to do it is, rather than say, oh my God, it looks like you need a minute, which probably I want to say sometimes, but it's not going to help. I would probably say, you know what? I need to go check some things and make sure I have some information correct. So can you give me, about 30 minutes to kind of look over this and think through these things? And I definitely want to come back and try to see if I can have a better understanding of what occurred in about a half an hour. Would that be okay? And so I usually will say, I need the time. And sometimes I do, when I notice that emotional response in another person, and then giving that time for those emotions to kind of diffuse, because most often we're giving feedback, we're hitting that wall. They may have already been in a bad place, or maybe they were triggered to a bad place. And even just sometimes the allowance of some time gives them a chance to kind of work through the emotion, get back to the logical part of your brain, and be willing to have that conversation. But I would, even in those situations, come back and say, hey, is now a good time? Because I really want to, work together with you to resolve this. And I think that the answers I need, the only person I can get them from is you. Can you please, let me know if this is a good time? And if they say no, respect it. When would be a better time? Because again, people are going through stuff. You got to give them that space. But I definitely will come back upfront, best intentions, want to do this together. You're the person I want to do this with. Can we please, discuss these things? But recognizing those emotions. And then another good thought you brought in, Rob, too, goes to another little saying I have. When you want to give people feedback and you're in a group setting, what I generally will coach a lot of my, especially leaders or team members on, if you give people an audience, they will give you a show, is what I generally will say, which means that feedback that I might be wanting to give you, if I'm in a room with 10 other people and I'm trying to give you this feedback, a lot of times you will respond totally differently than you would if it was just me and you. So always kind of be mindful of that. And that is one tip that I use a lot, definitely with leaders talking to individual contributors, managers talking to their direct reports, and also, individual contributors wanting to give your manager some feedback. So kind of be mindful of that. And then I have people sometimes that push back and say, but what if it's something that everyone needs to hear? And I'm like, okay, well, that specific conversation about that specific behavior change for that person is a conversation with just you and that person. And then you may come back and level set expectations with the group, yet you don't want to have this person in this group conversation feel like they're being the example, as you're giving them feedback in front of everybody because you feel like everybody should hear it. Make it 2 separate conversations. I'm having a specific conversation with Austin about some things that I'd love to see Austin do differently. And I'm coming back and having a group conversation about, our expectations around certain tasks, behaviors, or whatever, because it tends to put people less on the defensive when you do it like that. So I think that that's a thought too. Does that help any, Rob?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have about 5 minutes left, and there's one more question in the doc from Colleen. Colleen, do you want to voice it? Are you still here?
Hey, sure. Yeah, I had to switch from my phone to my laptop. So excited to be here. Thank you so much for this. This is great. And I am a huge fan of compassionate feedback, but my question stems from a real life example of somebody that was unwilling to receive feedback again and again and again. This is like a habitual thing and constantly on the defensive. So I know how I handled it, but I'm curious, how would you handle it when somebody is just a bit tone deaf to the notion of feedback or accountability or ownership of the situation?
I love it. I love that question, Colleen. I think for me, one of the things, and I have had similar situations, I think one of the things for me definitely is kind of recognizing or trying to think about like what would make a person, most of us are reasonable, rational, decent people. So what would make a person so resistant to feedback? And I think I kind of have taken deep dives and kind of explored, is it me? Is it my approach, even unintentionally? Is it, they've only received feedback that was hurtful in the past and they're not sure how to process it? Is it they don't really see a problem? Like they have no clue they're doing this wrong. And that's why, it's going on. So I think my first step in those situations is always really going through my head and saying, what in the world would make a person so hesitant and resistant to the feedback, and trying to eliminate as many of those things as possible. So if it's my approach, get a little bit more intentional and tactful about my approach. Like I said, I tell you, I'm a very direct person. So in those instances, tempering my directness with compassion and curiosity a lot more. If I think it's because the person has only received negative feedback in the past and they feel like somebody's out to get them, I may start off with a statement of good intent. Listen, Olga, I'm here to give you this feedback, not because I want you to feel bad. I'm trying to make you think you are wrong. This is to help you. If I feel like they just are not able to receive feedback, what are some other ways I can get the same messaging to them? Or back to, I think what I said a little bit earlier, or am I even the right person? Or is there another person that they trust a little bit more? Or is it another person that they tend to listen to or look up to? And how can I incorporate this person in being part of the solution here? And so I definitely will try to play with a couple of different variables to get through, hopefully, that barrier of whatever it is. And ultimately, there are some times, and I have been in some situations where no matter what, the person just didn't and couldn't receive it. And even in those situations, what kind of helped me out, Colleen, was like, I knew I tried my best. And if nothing else, I could walk away saying, I did everything I could to help this person, to get this information to them, to share these observations, and it was all rejected, and then at that point, there are other things that start to happen. But definitely for me, it's at first almost like playing whack-a-mole as to what may be possible causes of this person not being able to receive feedback. Because most of us, even if we don't like it initially, and I've had feedback given to me where I walked away and I was like kind of butthurt. But when I sat down and thought about it, I was like, no, that was actually something I needed. So to me, it's like, how can I try to help get through whatever different tools may help this person to at least hear this? And then at the end of the day, if nothing changes and they don't hear it, I know I at least did my best.
Yeah, the solution that we went with was I provided written feedback ahead of time, allowed that person to process it, get kind of like the emotion out. So then we could have like a constructive conversation, but that didn't sit well with me because it felt a little passive aggressive, but it actually seemed to work better for them. So I don't know if that was a good solution.
I love that. I think it is, because again, back to like most of the initial response is the emotional response: defense, deny, deflect, or defend. And you were able to give them a chance to even work through that before you were face to face, and that's super helpful. I don't see this passive aggressive. I think it's like brilliant because it's like, I'm giving you the data. You do what you need to do with the data to get ready to talk about the data, but at least you have the data. And then when we come together, now let's get to the logical and solving the problem versus working through the emotion in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for that question, Colleen, and for everyone's questions. We're just at time, so I'm going to wrap us up. But Maria, thank you again for such an awesome session. I've already seen a few messages come through the chat of people who've had to jump off early who really enjoyed it. I'm really excited to share this recording with team members who weren't able to join us live. And yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day. Happy hump day.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. You too. Bye, y'all. Have a good rest of your day.